1867 Sports Show, back for another fantastic week of Canadian sports talk. We are on episode number Gerald Vaughan tonight, Mr. Skinner. Do you know who Gerald Vaughan is?
Obviously someone who wore number 38.
He's a fantastic player for the Calgary Stampeders and I believe the Hamilton Tiger Cats in the CFL. But yeah, wore number 38, very good DB, and I believe he's in the Ring of Honor, if I'm not mistaken, as well.
Look at,
So
look at us finding relevant tie-ins there as opposed to some of
relevant
these 30
times.
numbers that we've been just scraping through by the skin of our teeth.
You got to do what you got to do, man. You got to do what you got to do. But yes, for anyone who's listening to this, there is a significant tie-in with Calgary, as we've got an Alberta connection tonight on today's show. So
Some would even call it
um,
a special guest coming up
some would
towards
even
the end.
call it a special guest. So yeah, definitely stay tuned for that. But yeah, it's been a minute, man. How's it going?
It's going good. I'm starting to feel like I could potentially play in the NBA as a Canadian based on the state of my shoulder, because the way that they are just flying off our current NBA stars, there's a little bit alarming. It's been quite the week for two particular Canadian stars with their shoulders in the association.
Before we get into that, I just want to just kind of circle back a little bit because I've seen your jump shot, and I wouldn't pick you in the Rec 2 league at the YMCA, let alone give you a chance at the NBA. So
First of all,
let's
if we are just going to get personal with this episode, we're getting sideways in a hurry
we're
here.
gonna have a long episode tonight.
Yeah. For an offensive lineman there, you're not too graceful in the paint yourself there, Twinkle Toes.
Oh, you have not seen me. They call me Kirk Nowitzki.
Oh, is that what they called it?
Yeah,
Or is that the
long
nickname that you gave yourself in the NBA 2K creator mode there?
definitely don't have to get into that, but
Erroneous on all accounts.
it doesn't matter. It's neither here nor there where I got the nickname. The fact is, I haven't.
All I was alluding to is the fact that I am now getting old and I am falling apart, much like our northern brethren up here. But any other little pot shots you want to take at me before
No,
we get into the
no,
world of
no.
sports
Get
here?
get into your topic. You're so sensitive.
Oh my goodness, it's late at night here. Caffeine's worn off from my coffee this morning. But for those who have not heard, Shaden Sharp of the Portland Trail Blazers and RJ Barrett of the Toronto Raptors, both sporting some injury designations heading into the season. Now, RJ's is significantly less severe in the sense of he's kind of at risk of, all right, will he miss maybe a small portion of training camp, maybe opening night, while this kind of heals up, picked up a little bit of a ding, we'll say.
Little boo boo
I think it was labeled a shoulder contusion. Is that fancy medical speak there they got for it?
for a bruise.
Yeah, I guess it was a deep one to sideline him. But pick that up coming off a screen actually in the NBA preseason game, which the Toronto Raptors played in Montreal. So always fun when the Raptors go to non-Toronto based cities when they're able to expand the brand a little bit there. But
May we?
well put, sir. Poutine. Guy Lafleur. Look at me go.
Le grenouille mange le pamplemousse.
Wow, this is going sideways in a hurry.
Oh, it always does. It always
Yeah.
does. But anyways, number two.
Number two, Shaden Sharp, unfortunately, actually needing shoulder surgery to repair his injury there. And so he is one that has a very promising future. He can jump out of the gym. I've mentioned him several times on the show already. I think he's potentially going to be kind of the next one because he's still very, very young. And the skill set that he possesses is absolutely unbelievable when you actually watch him in person. But he is going to be sidelined for significantly longer. So they're saying
Again.
several months here. Yeah, and that's part of the problem is for those that are keeping score at home was limited to just 32 games last season with Portland after he got sidelined not once but twice due to abdominal injury. So just came off major surgery for his core, and now he's undergoing the knife again for his shoulder, which as someone who has taken their fair share of dings and bruises over their career, you can probably attest to not great news.
No. And I was just about to say, what's the best ability, Kyle?
That would be availability.
Availability. And yeah, as good as Shaden Sharp has been when he's been on the court, he just hasn't been on the court very much.
Yeah.
So I really hope that he can kick this to the curb because, again, knowing what it's like to go through injury problems when it's not anything of your doing, it's a very frustrating thing, right? And really, some players are just snake bitten when it comes to injuries. The fact that he's had two significant surgeries this early in his career, that's tough. Like that's really tough to look at because you look at all the great talent that's come through the NBA. And I mean, is Portland just one of these wastelands for these great players with terrific promise that have these catastrophic injuries and they
Well,
call it a career by the time they're 25?
yeah, maybe that's the problem. We need to get him out of Portland and relaunch a Vancouver franchise and
Get him
just
down to you. Get him down to Utah. No one gets hurt in Utah.
there you go. Something about the altitude there. It'll be fresh as a daisy. But I mean, yeah, that's exactly it, right? On the one hand, you never want to lose kind of these crucial development years because really your first 2 to 3 seasons in the NBA, you're learning what it's like to be
Yeah.
a pro. That being said, anyone who has watched the Portland Trail Blazers play lately, and even the roster that they currently have, they're going to be sellers again too. Like who knows what's
Mm-hmm.
going to happen with DeAndre Ayton? They just drafted Klingon from UConn, who if you're really sold on Ayton as your center of the future, you probably aren't spending a lottery pick on kind of the heir apparent there. So
Yeah.
he'll probably get moved out. There's some other, not even really. It's crazy to call them, veteran pieces because they're only like 25-ish, but a bunch more pieces that they're probably ready to move on from already. Like other than Klingon and Shaden Sharp and Simons and Scoot Henderson, like you look at that roster. It's not a ton to love about it. They're very much, a lot of potential, but
Yep.
they've also been labeled as that team that's had potential ever since Lillard ultimately moved on, and probably even a few seasons towards the end of his Portland tenure there as well too.
Yeah.
It's very concerning to see that he's missing all of these reps, but on the other side too, you can almost take it as a glass half full because he's not developing the bad habits that sometimes creep into your skill set when you're playing on these bad teams that you're lucky to win 20 games in a season. So if you're going to be an optimist, that's the way to look at it. But like you said, you want to see him on the court at the end of the day.
Yeah. Because these teams that are built to last the test of time, they're all guys who play together for a long time. You look at where Denver is, you look at where Boston is. These are all teams that have kind of grown up together and played together for over 5 years. And it's very hard to develop a camaraderie and a fluidness with a team when you're always, okay, well, this guy got hurt. I got to substitute this guy in or trade this guy out because we're not performing as well as we should. The coach just got fired here. Like, there's such a thing as continuity that breeds success. And unfortunately for Portland, this has just been a thing since the days of Rasheed Wallace and Damon Stoudemire and that group that was there in the early 2000s. We just haven't had the long-term stability of these rosters. For all the Greg Odens and Brandon Roys and LaMarcus Aldridges and Damian Lillards, like we don't see these guys play together.
Yeah.
Because like the one small sample size we had was back in I think 2008 when they had Greg Oden, Brandon Roy, and LaMarcus Aldridge all playing together on Portland, and they had the best record in the NBA. And unfortunately, two of those three gentlemen had career-ending injuries within 3 years of them playing in the NBA. So, yeah, I mean, I hope the best for the kid. I really do think he could be one of these late bloomers, like a Tracy McGrady type of player who starts out slow but eventually progresses into this elite scorer because of his athleticism. Yeah. So let's hope that Mr. Sharp can kind of kick that injury bug and get back on the court. As far as RJ Barrett goes, I mean, this is such a smart move by the Raptors. You don't need him in the preseason. You know what he's bringing to the table. He just finished a long offseason playing for Team Canada. He's got enough minutes in, right? Yeah. Sit him down, let him rest, get your young guys more reps. This is a great thing for a young roster, like you just mentioned. Reps. You know what Quickley's going to bring to the table? He did it last year when you traded for him. You know what Barrett's bringing to the table? He showed you last year, and he's even improved on that in his run in the Olympics. You don't need to be playing Pirtle. You don't need to be playing Olynyk. You don't need to be playing the guys who are ultimately going to make up your core, But you do need these guys like Grady Dick. You need your, Jacoby Walter. You need all of these guys who you've drafted in the last couple of years. Let's see what you've got out of the gate so we know how many minutes we can effectively play you this season.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to be an offensive player that we can go in if we need a kick? Are you going to be a defensive shutdown guy that we need to sub in the last 5 minutes of the fourth quarter? This is a very imperative time for, obviously Coach Darko to have a look at where things are going to sit, because ultimately he's going to have maybe a group of 3 veterans over the age of 26, and then everyone else that kind of falls in that 25 and younger range, which we just talked about it. If you can keep this whole team together and they can play these meaningful minutes, you're going to see a Raptors team who can probably, make a little bit of noise this season. And then going forward, this could be one of these rosters that really takes that next step up with a healthy Scotty Barnes, who's coming back and ready to show people that he is that all-world caliber player.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just putting the cherry on top of that, had one hell of a preseason showing before he ultimately went down via injury. He very much looked to be in mid-season form, and to your point, has kind of taken that next step offensively. And I think this could be one of those trades where in a few years, New York looks back at it and goes, okay, we got a nice piece that fits well with the Tibbs system and this, that, the other, but we really let an elite level scorer go. At least that's what Raptors fans are hoping at this point. Speaking of players the Raptors might let go, guess what? Bruce Brown trade watch is already in full effect here, because it's been reported that already 3 teams have kicked the tires on him, with the Dallas Mavericks apparently already tabling a trade offer, which was ultimately rejected. Is this something that, if you were Raptors front office here and you've got this asset, which for all intents and purposes, you're going to move at some point, you've got teams sniffing around, is this something that you would be trying to move before the season starts so that you can insulate that core and be like, all right, this is our group moving forward? Or do you hold on to it and let kind of that bidding process potentially build up a little bit as it gets closer to the trade deadline and teams figure out whether they're contenders or pretenders?
So this is a very difficult question, because we've talked about it several times. There is such a thing as holding on to a player for too long. And this is something that you went in on last year with Masai and Bobby Webster, of holding on to a guy like Pascal Siakam too long and ultimately getting a diminished return for what is an all-star caliber player. Now, Bruce Brown's not the same type of player that Pascal Siakam is, but in today's NBA, he's a very useful player for any type of system.
Yeah.
So if I'm looking at the situation, you know what? You had opportunities to trade him at last year's trade deadline. You had opportunities to trade him at the draft. He's still a member of the Raptors. Is this something where maybe you just wanted to keep him around so that way he could be kind of that veteran influence on the guards on this team? Because you've got kind of the big veterans like the Pirtles and the Oleniks and the Bouchers. You don't have anybody really kind of taking the guards by the hand saying, okay, guys, let's go. You've pretty much got the kids, right? Your most mature guy might be one of your rookies in Jamal Shed. So that's one of those, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't situations. Me personally, I think that I would probably look to move him by opening night.
Yeah.
Because I think this is where teams are really trying to maneuver their rosters around to figure out who is going to be your 12-man roster going into the season. Do we keep this guy who's on the roster bubble, who's had a really good preseason, but he's a veteran, or he's a veteran minimum guy, or he's a rookie undrafted? Those are the guys that you're going to say, okay, we'll give him a shot. We'll see what he's got. You know what you're getting in Bruce Brown, right? He's a steady 3-and-D type of player. He's going to give you, his lunch pail, 25 minutes a night type of game. He's not going to wow you with anything, but he's a solid double-digit scorer. He can rebound effectively for a guard. He passes the ball well, and he plays good defense, right? So really a guy that, like I mentioned before, can work in any type of roster. The fact that you've already got 3 or 4 teams kicking the tires is a good thing. You don't want to let it linger too long where now these teams either go somewhere else to fill that roster need, or they just lose interest and say, you know what, you guys are taking way too long on this. You're humming and hawing every time I pick up the phone and call you. I'm done. I'm moving on. So I would personally try and move him before opening night, because I think at this point his value is still high enough where you can get a good return, and then you yourself as a roster can say, here is our core lineup that we want to go into this season with, and then into the next 3-4 years with, right? That's why you traded, all those pieces last year. You accrued those 4 draft picks because you want to get them minutes to make this active roster. So my 2 cents on that, I think that you've probably got a similar attitude towards it, but interested to hear your take on it.
Yeah, and this is one of those situations where we do actually agree, unlike the fluidity of my jump shot, which is absolutely wet, by the way.
Rain dance.
Yeah. Kobe. It's one of those situations where if you just look at it from the simple stance of where are teams at right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them are probably more enamored than they should be with, oh, I just added this piece. He's going to be the missing link via the draft. And then they quickly realize, like, oh, he's only getting 6 minutes a night and he hasn't panned out quite as well as we thought he was going to. But you've got a much larger pool of potential suitors now than when you get to Christmas break and half the teams are like, well, we are now in full-on sell-off mode. So we're actually competing interests to your own assets that you're trying to move, right? So for that, logic alone, I would be more inclined to move them sooner rather than later, whether that's ultimately before opening night or, 2 months into the season or something like that. Mm-hmm. I would be really trying to get this done pre-trade deadline so that you're the first domino that falls rather than you're now kind of talking to 2 or 3 teams who have shrunk that pool down to they're the only ones who have movable assets at this point, and you're kind of negotiating against yourself.
100%. And, like we both kind of alluded to, you just can't find yourself in that purgatory situation where it's like, well, we got to move them, but we've kind of left it to the point of, well, we're just going to take what we can get.
Yeah.
Right.
The poo-poo platter special.
Yeah. So, I mean, at this point, I think you got 2 options. Either you re-sign him because you think he's going to be a part of your future for the next 3 years, or you get rid of him right now. Like, stop stringing this along. It's not fair to the player because he's going out there. He's being a professional. He's doing everything you're asking him to do. This isn't a Goran Dragic situation.
Yeah.
He's not just out there going through the motions being like, get me the F out of here. He's actually saying, I want to be a Raptor. This is where I am right now. I'm playing for this team. I'm showing up to the Quickly and Barrett contracts. I'm showing up to the Scotty Barnes contract signing. Like, this is important to him. He wants to show that he can be that good teammate that will attract a lot of interest from other teams. So, again, I hope that something gets done for both the team and the player.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Speaking of it being rose-colored glasses, everyone's got a shot. This is our year. Another league that is just getting ready to kick off, the good old NHL. And I know you as an Oilers fan, you're ready to get back at it for another chance at Lord Stanley's mug here this season.
Ready to get hurt again. But I mean, it's one of those things where everybody's got the Stanley Cup aspirations glowing in their eyes, from the first drop of the opening puck to the final horn of the opening game. So looking forward to this 2024-2025 season, Kyle.
Yeah. Well, again, we could run through every single team, but as you've reminded me numerous times on this podcast, we are a Canadian podcast. So why would we bother focusing on any of those American franchises? So I'm going to play a game here. Unbeknownst to you, I'm throwing it at you so I get knee-jerk reaction, honest feedbacks here.
Okay? All right. Love it.
So the game is going to be, for each Canadian franchise here, you are going to give one sentence that describes how that franchise feels about itself heading into the season. So I'm going to give you a softball one here because you're the most familiar with them, obviously. Your Edmonton Oilers. What is their one sentence descriptor heading into 2024-25?
We know that we can compete for the Stanley Cup, and after our offseason, we are even stronger.
Excellent run-on sentence and use of commas there.
Absolutely. You said one sentence. I can do a long sentence if I so choose.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that kind of has to be the mentality with Edmonton, because anytime you go to a game 7 in the Stanley Cup final and it's a 1-goal game and yada, 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 right? Like, you learned a lot about yourselves as a team, and to see every single one of those kind of veteran players, unless it was, okay, we've already told you we're not going to bring you back because we've got something else in mind here. Coming back, it has to bode well, right? And you're already kind of seeing all the, Amazon documentaries and this, that, the other. We're getting behind the scenes. Connor McDavid actually has a personality and can get, fired up, unbeknownst to most of the NHL there. But it's absolutely, it's got to be a lot of, quiet confidence is kind of what I was going to describe it as, because I don't think this is going to be a team that goes out there and is beating their chest and rah rah. Every expert, every betting service, sports book around the country has them as the Stanley Cup favorites. They know all of that. They're not going to go out there and put that out for tabloid fodder or bulletin board material. They know how close they came. And on paper, like you alluded to, the additions that they made probably look a little bit better than they did last year. And anytime you can come into a season where you're already looking better than last year, the run that you went on, and you've got the added motivation of a huge chip on your shoulder, that's a very business-like season that is coming up, rather than I don't know, is it going to be another early playoff exit, and can our goalie do it, and all the other million and one things that have kind of plagued this franchise over the last couple of years.
Yeah. Nope. That's even longer run-on sentence, if I do say so myself. But
quiet confidence. I said I had two words. Did you think that I just went ... and then continued speaking the entire time?
You're like every Gen Z text message. You just kept going on and on and on and on and on. But anyways, no, 100% agree. I think that Edmonton is primed for a return trip to the Stanley Cup this year, if all the pieces fall into place.
All right, the Vancouver Canucks. They're a bit of a shifty franchise that made some offseason, additions and subtractions as well too. So they've kind of got a variety of outcomes in front of them. How are they self-describing themselves this year?
If we can get someone to play net other than Thatcher Demko, we will be in the thick of it.
You've really understood this assignment really well. Just nice and succinct here. I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of their biggest question mark, right? Is what are we getting out of our netminder here? And they'll find out in a hurry what they're getting, right? This was a top end, very one-line driven offensive team last season, plus, an all-world caliber blue liner in Quinn Hughes. And that was kind of the MO of their season last year, right? So to expect all of those four players to essentially have career-esque years like they did last year, it's a tall ask, right? You need something else to step up, whether it's, a second pairing on the blue line takes that next step forward, whether it's, a rookie addition or someone that they brought in the offseason, like something else needs to spark this team. And I think the biggest way to spark that is obviously going to be who is their netminder, right? Like they were absolutely trying to hold it together by duct tape, band-aids, super glue, hopes and dreams, whatever you want to call it, after Demko got injured last season. And to a large degree, they gave the Oilers everything that they could kind of handle. And so they're a team that's close, but they had a lot of things that went right. So my sentence to them was last year a fluke? Period. By the way, just so we're clear that the sentence has ended here.
Punctuation is key, Kyle.
Absolutely. Is last year replicable, or is it going to be a kind of flash in the pan and they're coming back to earth and still probably a playoff team, but not, contending for a division title type playoff team this year?
Yeah. No, and I made a comment to my brother, who's an Vancouver fan, and a friend of mine who's a very big Vancouver fan as well. They were a fun team to watch last year.
They were.
They're very well coached with Rick Tocchet. They've got a very entertaining lineup to put out there, whether they're a one line scoring team or not. But yeah, can we see a second line step up and ultimately take a little bit of a load off of that first line? But yeah, ultimately it comes back to who's in net, right? Like Arthur Shelov's was a great story last year in the playoffs. He was fantastic.
Is he who else was a good story though? The Hamburglar. And we all saw how quickly that fell off a cliff.
This is true. This is true. But Yeah, I mean, Vancouver is just the type of team where they're only going to go as far as their goaltending lets them go because, like you said, they had a lot of things go right for them last year. But these are the types of teams that either they're going to show who they really are in their true colors, like you're alluding to, or they're going to say, you know what, a lot of things went right for us last year because we put ourselves in those positions to make them go right.
Yeah. Got to make your own luck sometimes,
Make
right?
your own luck.
There you
Everyone in Vegas says the same thing.
go. Nothing bad has ever happened.
Nothing bad. Nothing
Yeah.
bad has ever happened in Vegas.
Yeah. Well, keep working our way back towards the east here, even though we took a quick detour because we had to start with Edmonton there. So zigzagging our way eastwards here.
Yeah.
Go with the Calgary Flames, who, spoiler alert, we'll have a little bit more on later. So for you Flames fans, stick around to the end of the episode. But what is the one sentence, and maybe trying to whittle away a few words with this sentence this time, you would say for the good old Calgary Flames?
How can we get rid of Jonathan Huberdeau's contract?
Oh, I like that one. Extrapolate.
Well, I mean, look, you made the trade for Matthew Tkachuk. You got back what you got back. And ultimately, I think Craig Conroy has done a fantastic job of retooling the roster to remain competitive.
Yeah.
But this is a situation where clearly Jonathan Huberdeau does not fit in Calgary. This is the second coach that he'll have there. He obviously isn't comfortable playing in Calgary if we take the sample size that we've taken. There's just obviously something missing. So can we look at his contract, which you already mentioned, in a previous episode, like it's the largest one that they've ever given somebody in Calgary. Can we get that off the books somehow? And is there a team who's ready to compete that is willing to take and absorb that contract to ultimately, give them that extra boost towards that playoff run? Because Calgary's in that situation where they're kind of on the fence of competing, but they're not really going to be the team that's going to, even if they do squeak in the playoffs, they're not really going that far. Yeah. So can we get this off the books? Can we bring in some, pieces that we can use? And ultimately, going forward, can we reallocate this money to bring in the players that Craig Conroy can ultimately use to retool this lineup even more?
Yeah. And I think, unfortunately for them, probably the best suitor that could have been on the market to take that contract off their books probably is already off the market there in the Washington Capitals when they went out and acquired PLD. So, that's a team that was just hell-bent on, we know what we are. We kind of just need a centerman to be able to help Ovi get past Gretzky's record. And we're willing to, eat some salary to make sure that happens. Don't think it's happening now that they've already made that trade, but that would have been kind of a natural fit for them if that was ultimately the path that they chose to take. My sentence is going to be goaltender related here, and is Wolf for real? Because here's a young prospect who we kind of got little small spoonfuls of last year, and they were very deliberate in the games that they got him into. Obviously, AHL goaltender of the year. Here's someone who has all the talent in the world and the accolades to back it up, but is going to be playing on a leaky defensive team in Calgary, to put it nicely there, right? Like this is a squad that's got some bumps coming ahead to them, and right, we have heard all sorts of quotes come out of that locker room about, we're better than people are giving us credit for, and all the other million and one things that teams say before the season, because last thing you want is your superstar to put a microphone in front of them and go, yeah, we suck, get ready for a lottery pick. So it's going to be a rough season for them, but this is where he could very easily put a stranglehold on that crease, and he becomes the next Mika Kiprasov, and here's your goaltender of the future for the next 10 plus years here.
That's the goal for every team, is can we bring up a homegrown kind of developed prospect like this and make them into our number one starter who can be a legitimate top whatever goaltender in the league, right? You don't need him to be a superstar. You just need him to be able to stop the puck on a regular basis. And that's the problem that Calgary's had, even with Marc-Andre over the last, 10 years, is you get a stretch of good games, and then you see it drop off a cliff with their goaltending especially. So if they can find a steady presence back in that net, I think you're 100% right. They can take that next step forward even faster.
Yeah.
Right? They expedite their process way quicker if they can find that guy. So 100%. I think that this season is going to be very indicative of where Calgary's going to go based on who's in net.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one team that doesn't need to worry about who's in net is the Winnipeg Jets, because obviously, when you've got a perennial Vezina candidate between the pipes there, not one of your concerns. So, what is the mantra coming out of Winnipeg these days in your mind?
How do we get out of the first round of the playoffs?
That's an excellent question.
I think Winnipeg is that team that everyone kind of looks at every year. It's like, this is the year. This is the year they're going to crack through it, and they're going to be that one team that goes on the stretch run in the playoffs and ultimately be a dark horse Stanley Cup contender. And then every year they either end up with a juggernaut in the first round or they can't score. So, how can the Winnipeg Jets navigate themselves through that first round of that playoffs? Because let's be honest, they're going to be a playoff team. They're too good of a team not to be in the playoffs. How are they going to navigate themselves through that first round? Again, you get it off your back once, and then it just kind of breaks everything through. You look at Vancouver for years when they were playing Chicago. For whatever reason, they just couldn't get past the Chicago Blackhawks. And then it just took that 1 year. They finally slayed the dragon and they made their cup run. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where I see this Winnipeg team right now. They're talented up front. They're talented on the defensive side. And obviously they've got one of the best goalies, if not the best goalie in the world right now, in Connor Hellebuck. But something's missing when it comes to the playoffs, because where you see them in the regular season is not what you see in the playoffs.
Yeah. And that's exactly where I'm going with my sentence here, is because you don't know, what this team is truly capable of, because they seem to just be hitting their head against the ceiling of their potential right now. So my sentence is this a contender or a pretender? Because we all know they have the ability to make the postseason. We've seen this movie multiple times before, but we've also seen it fizzle out very quickly in the postseason, far earlier than they probably would have liked as well, too. And so you even look at some of the things that have happened to this team in the offseason there, between, the Rucker McGroarty trade to Pittsburgh, and obviously Braden Yeager coming back. I mean, you can kind of look at that as a net positive, because you're getting someone who does want to play in Winnipeg. And no slight against the beautiful city of Winnipeg, it's not everyone's cup of tea, right? So again, it's a team that is going to struggle to attract free agents, star players, and they need to rely heavily on their homegrown talent. But all it takes is one, heaven forbid, it's 2 seasons in a row of missing on those prospects, and suddenly you now go from a playoff team to, all of our players are now much older. We're no longer a playoff team. Now we have to tear everything down to the studs and do a complete rebuild. And I'm not saying it's this year, but the Winnipeg seems like a team that's really teetering on that precipice where, let's say, knock on wood, it doesn't happen, but let's say Mark Scheifele gets injured, for a large stretch of the season. Like, their margin for error is very, very thin. So they're a team that has everything that you would want between solid defense, goals against, they don't give it up, they're tough to play against, they've got an all-world goaltender, like all the things that when it comes time for the playoffs, it's all the cliches of like, this is how a team is built to go on deep runs, but they just haven't done that. And they've largely been healthy up to this point. So what happens if, the injury bug rears its ugly head? This is a team that could go in a very, very different direction. So although right now they're looking like, as usual, a contender who could get hot and go on a deep run, they don't have the luxury of having, that depth that an Edmonton has, where, if Draisaitl goes down, they've still got McDavid powering their top line and their power play and all these other weapons that can not replace him, but shoulder the load and right the ship if he needs to miss a month or two in the middle of the season.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's kind of where, again, and I'll use that as an Edmonton analogy, for Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, is worth every penny of his contract that he has. Because not only can he be an effective winger on a top line, he can center a third line, and then he can also bump up to a one or a two if need be. So that's a luxury that, not just Winnipeg, but not a lot of teams in the NHL have. So you're 100% right. Can Winnipeg really kind of avoid, one of those key guys getting hurt, like a Scheifele or a Morrissey or, God forbid, a Hellebuck? And, can they get to that point of getting to the playoffs where everybody's healthy, everybody's playing well, and they can just crack the ice and get through? Because that's a team that I actually want to see make a run, because they're damn fun to watch.
Yeah, there's no more electric atmosphere than that Winnipeg barn when it comes playoff season. Unfortunately, they just haven't had much to cheer about. It's been, 2 home games in, we're done.
Yeah, correct.
Oh, all right. We're into Ontario here now. So let's fire it up. The Toronto Maple Leafs. What is your one sentence for good old TML Nation?
Can Austin Matthews win the cup by himself?
Oh, so no help from anyone else here. You have zero faith in Marner, Nylander, Tavares. None of them.
I don't say that because I have no faith in them. It's just they're so reliant on a guy like an Austin Matthews. I think taking the captaincy away from Tavares and giving it to Matthews is actually a positive step forward, because putting more on that guy's shoulders is exactly what I think is going to drive him to take his game to the next level. Like, if you watch him play, phenomenal hockey player, best scorer in the league, right? He's big, he's physical, he can skate, and ultimately, he might not be the most vocal guy, but you don't need him to be vocal. Have him lead by example and be that presence on the ice. That being said, you don't see a lot of these other guys kind of stepping up with him. Like, I don't see a Mitch Marner being anything other than, I'm going to get my 100 points and just disappear, because that's what he's shown to be. Willie Nylander, great player. Is he the type of player who can ultimately replace Mitch Marner on that Austin Matthews line? But then you're kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul. You're taking him off that second line, which was actually pretty good last year. So there's too many what ifs in that Toronto roster, and I wanted to get into their goaltending situation because that's another inquiry in itself. But Austin Matthews is going to take that team as far as they go, right? He's the leader. He's the guy who kind of stirs the pot. So that's ultimately what a Toronto team needs. He's kind of the Matt Sundin of this era, where you look at those Toronto teams from that generation in the 2000s and whatnot. They advanced because Matt Sundin kind of shouldered the load and said, all right, I'm taking you guys with me, and we're only going to go as far as my big body can take us. So Austin Matthews has to be that guy if Toronto has any chance of advancing anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the low-hanging fruit is obviously the goaltenders, or you could even pick blue line, right? We've well chronicled the question marks that we've had regarding those two areas of roster construction for Toronto. But I'm going to go with the core four's final ride is essentially how I'm going to label it, because I don't see any world, whether they win the cup, whether they don't even make the playoffs, whether they fizzle out in the first round as they always do, where this group is back together next year.
Yeah.
Now, like you just said, aside from Austin Matthews, who is safe, there's a case to be made that any of the other three of Nylander, Tavares, or Marner could be traded mid-season even. And that's not even if things go horribly wrong, right?
Yeah.
Like there may even be a situation where if the right deal comes along, like, are you really going to sit there and tell me that, if you've got a bona fide stud defenseman and maybe a plug and play prospect coming back the other way in exchange for Mitch Marner, that front office is not taking a long, hard look at it and being like, okay, subtract a little bit of offense to finally fix one of the big glaring holes on our back end there. Like, I just see this being an absolute crossroads year for this franchise, and they are going to have a decision to make at the end of it in terms of what this roster looks like moving forward. So however it is that this season plays out for them, this is the final year of these four players that they have relied on so heavily that are going to be wearing blue and white. Like I would honestly be shocked if even three of the four are back next year. I genuinely think it could just be, whatever, Nylander and Matthews that are ultimately Maple Leafs when all is said and done for puck drop 2025-26. So I think it's going to be an interesting year. It's obviously going to be very standings and, points related outcomes here. But if this is a team that gets presented with the right offer, anyone other than Austin Matthews, I think, is on the table for this team to get moved.
Especially because you've got the new, administration in there, right? Like Brad Treliving, he's a new GM. He didn't draft any of these guys.
Yeah.
He just went out and he committed to Austin Matthews, which obviously you had to do, but he's not married to any of these players. That makes it easier to move on from them. So I think that gets lost in a lot of the shuffle here where they say, well, why didn't they do this before? Well, Kyle Dubas was pretty instrumental in, bringing these guys in and then ultimately giving them these big contracts that are hamstringing them right now. So there's no ties with Brad Treliving. He's pretty much here to say, this is going to be my roster. You brought me in here to do it, to do it my way. That's the way I'm going to do it. So I'm interested to see Toronto because obviously fandom is going to be rampant for the first few months here because this is going to be this is our year. The Leafs are going to finally, win that cup that we've been, sorely missing since 67.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm going to skip over the nation's capital because I'm going to end up bookending it here with your team first, my team last there, and everyone else in the middle. So heading over to good old Montreal, the Montreal Canadiens, interesting team heading into the year, depending on who you talk to. Mixed expectations for what to expect. What is your one sentence to describe the Habs this season?
Is Marty St. Louis a Jack Adams front runner?
Ooh. Okay. I like it.
So I think we've seen kind of where Montreal started a few years ago when, again, based on their recent documentary, The Rebuild, this is kind of where things started. And it was really key that bringing a guy like a Marty St. Louis. Everyone kind of criticized at the time saying, well, he doesn't really have a lot of coaching experience. He's just kind of getting into it himself. I think that's what they needed because how many times have we seen the cycle of Montreal Canadiens coaches, because there's only a handful of them that are bilingual, the Claude Julians to Michel Therrien, to the Claude Julien to Michel Therrien. Oh, Jacques Martin is in there. Guy Carvino, Claude Julien, Michel Therrien. Like, this is kind of where things were in Montreal for so long. And that's why you always saw mediocre results.
Mm-hmm.
You bring in a guy like a Marty St. Louis, you tear it down to the core, and then you build it back up with a young guy who can learn on the job. But ultimately, he's going to bring a level of intensity. And also, look, he's an undrafted player who ended up becoming one of the more elite players of his generation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, are you telling me that players aren't going to listen to this guy? He's 5'7", and they're going to say, oh, how did you make it as far as you did and have the success that you did being that I'm towering over top of you? Like, you can't teach heart. And when you're looking at your coach, he's diving in practice, he's blocking shots, he's getting right in there with those are the types of coaches that players ultimately rally around. I mean, we spoke about Rick Tocchet in Vancouver. You saw the absolute skyrocket, when Rick Tocchet took that team over. Not to say that, Bruce Boudreau is not a great coach because he is, but just for specific teams, there are certain coaches that just have that magic touch. And I think that Marty St. Louis, this is the year where you're going to see them take that next step up with Suzuki, with Caulfield, and then ultimately when Laine comes back, you're starting to see, a good core group of players that have been together now for a couple of years. They're right on that cusp. Yeah. So if they can, be that, 6, 7, 8 team that's qualifying for the playoffs, I think Marty St. Louis is ultimately the driving force behind that because he's gotten the most out of all these young players.
No. I see a world in which it can happen, but it ties in perfectly to my sentence, which is temper your expectations. Because as someone who has been living through a rebuild for multiple seasons now, it's not as simple as just saying, well, our documentary, which is super originally titled here, is done filming. We're a playoff team now. Let's go. There's going to be some bumps in the road. And I think, again, Montreal fans are some of the most passionate fans you will find in the entire NHL, but sometimes that passion leads to overinflation of expectations, which borders on flat out delusion sometimes. So I really think that this is a team that is absolutely going to improve. But are they even a playoff team yet? I don't know. Because the East is very, very wide open, and there's a lot of teams that are kind of flirting with this. We're
Yeah.
going to take that next step, right? Like you
Mm-hmm.
could have a world in which the New Jersey Devils are the best team in the entire Eastern Conference if everything breaks right. Or they could miss the playoffs entirely, right? And
Yeah.
you've got the Ottawas, you've got the Buffaloes, you've got the Detroits, you've got the Montreals that are all kind of just
Yeah.
log jammed in there. All four of them can't make the postseason. It'd be tough for even three or even two of them to make the postseason, right?
Yeah.
So again, I think the Montreal Canadiens are, if you're looking at them on a graph, they're absolutely on the rise. Are they going to have players who get valuable reps this season and improve their point production and totals and all of that? Sure. But do they have the goaltending to get them to the postseason? I've got serious questions about that.
Common theme.
Yeah,
Common theme.
absolutely. Right. But unlike Toronto, who doesn't have the goaltending, or Vancouver, who doesn't have the goaltending, you've got all world first lines who can kind of cover up some of those warts with some 6-5 wins, right? Like, again, Montreal has some nice pieces, but they are not in the same realm of Toronto's top line, Vancouver's top line, Edmonton's top line, or some of these other franchises that are more offensively inclined, we will say, that can cover up some of their shortcomings between the pipes. So I think this is a season that, when all is said and done, if you take a bird's eye view of it, it's positive for the Habs, but they ultimately fall short of the playoffs just because, guess what? Slavkovsky is absolutely developing, but to expect him to be a 40 goal scorer and one of the elite power forwards in the league this season, like, I got some magic beans to sell you over here too. It's just not happening. If it happens, it would be one of the most unprecedented leaps in NHL history right there. It would be akin to Jonathan Cheechoo scoring 56 goals out on the West Coast. He's going to be better than he was last year. No one is trying to debate you about that. But let's temper expectations here, Montreal fans. It's not time to start planning the parade. But if they do get in the playoffs, to your point, absolutely, St. Louis is walking home with a piece of hardware for his work behind the bench.
And I think I say that, and I think I know where you're coming from on your point, because let's just look how tough that division is that they're in.
Yeah.
They've got to get over one of these four teams: Florida, Tampa, Boston, Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're talking about probably the four best teams in the Eastern Conference that are all playing in the same division. So in order for you guys to take that next step, one of those teams has to be leapfrogged, because, I don't know many fifth teams that are qualifying for the playoffs, right? It's usually going to be 4-4, especially with the other division being fairly wide open considering where things are. So,
wasn't it like until the last week of the season last year, the Metropolitan had like 8 teams mathematically alive for the playoffs or something?
Yeah. There was only 2 eliminated, I think, and then everyone else was still alive. So, yeah, 100%. I think it's going to be even worse this year.
Yeah.
Because, again, all these teams kind of stayed in that realm of mediocrity without taking that really big step forward. I mean, Carolina is probably going to be okay, just because they've got a talented roster. They've got solid goaltending, 1A, 1B. But, Pittsburgh, Philly, Islanders, like, where are they going to be?
Yeah.
Right? The Rangers, like, they're going to be
Devils.
okay.
Yeah.
The Devils. They're going to be, in good positions to be in those playoff spots, but where are they going to be seated? That's the issue. So, yeah, Montreal's got to really hope that they get out to a hot start and they can kind of tread water because, again, it's a grind. Yeah. You can tread water, as you know, as being an Ottawa Senators fan, from November until March, you're going to be okay.
Yeah. Speaking of, you
like that
Ottawa
segue?
Senators.
You like that segue?
Love it. What is, I'm saving mine. What is your one sentence here for the Ottawa Senators in the nation's capital?
I've got 2. One of them is, team related. One of them is podcast related. So I'll go with the team one. I'll go with the team one first.
Okay.
Is Travis Green the coach to take this team to that next step? And the reason I say that is I know you have your thoughts. I know what his record is, when he was coaching Vancouver. I know what he's done in junior. Is he the missing piece to get this roster moving forward? Because obviously they didn't get rid of a lot of players that ultimately have made up this core. They've ultimately kept them together and signed them to these contracts. Is Travis Green going to get the most out of players other than Brady Tkachuk? TBD. Like, he seems like a perfect fit for Tkachuk, but is he a perfect fit for Stützle? Is he a perfect fit for Sanderson? Shabbat? Like, is he the guy who's going to get the most out of these players? I think that's where I kind of look at it as being like, if it is, yeah, Ottawa's looking great. And you could look at Travis Green as being, well, you know what? You had that impact from year one. But as we've seen in years past with Ottawa, year one for new coaches with them usually goes pretty good. How do you maintain it after year one? Because Paul McLean, Corey Clouston, we had what's his face, buddy Dave Cameron. Dave Cameron.
Say, which Ottawa Senators coach who took a nosedive that I've since deleted from my memory?
There's so
would you
many
like to bring
of them.
Up here.
Yeah, there's so many of them. But I mean, Guy Boucher. There's another one. Like, you see these guys have success in year one, and then for whatever reason, they just can't figure out how to make the jump from year one to year two. So, maybe Travis Green could buck that trend and be your next, 10, 15-year head coach, a la Jacques Martin.
Yeah. All right.
Do you want me to get into yours, or do you want me to do my podcast related one?
We'll save your podcast related
okay.
one while I still have energy. So,
okay.
The Ottawa Senators, this is your last chance. Is essentially what I'm going to say. Because, honest to God, I can't do it. I can't do it for another year of, we got torpedoed in November. It's not happening anymore. This is where I'm at with this franchise at this point. I have seen the exact same script play out year after year after year. And what have they done? It's been, all right, we're going to tinker around the fringes. We're going to do this. We're going to do that.
Look, everyone, you can see where they can yank out his heart, right? As you pause it.
So, honestly, though, the biggest question mark was obviously between the pipes. You're bringing in a former Vezina winner here in Linus Ullmark, who I don't know if you've seen any of his interviews to date, but have been phenomenal, right? I love the one in the locker room where he's putting Gary Otch in his place there, and telling him like, we haven't accomplished anything. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. Preseason means nothing, and it's like, that is finally the attitude that you want to hear out of that locker room. So it's a very, and I almost like the fact that they haven't signed him to an extension as much as I would love for it to be like, yeah. 8x8. Here we go. We're ready to, usher in a new era here. Number one, we've seen way too many knee-jerk extensions handed out in the nation's capital. Won't name names here, but you can pretty much look at that roster and who they've traded over the last couple of years of who the albatrosses are. Now, Again, previous regime, give them the benefit of the doubt. But anytime you've got mutual interest in the outcome of a season, because if Linus Ullmark goes out there and stinks the place up to high hell, that doesn't bode well for him on the open market. Now, I would love in a perfect world for them to go out there and by the time he's got, a 28-3 record or something like that, mid-season, all right, fantastic. We're going to go ahead and
lock him up.
But let's not just assume that, all right, we switched who was between the pipes. All problems are now solved. So again, it's a huge, huge piece there. But to your Travis Green point, I think a lot of this team's success beyond what was going on in nets has to do with, can Travis Green maximize what they're getting out of Thomas Chabot? Because this is a player you spent big money on. You thought he was going to be the absolute 1A top pairing defenseman for the next 10 plus years of your life. And he was going to be offensively gifted, defensively responsible, everything that you could want over a number one blue liner. And he started out that way. He was on a great path, but we've seen him absolutely fall off, right? To the point where it's not that hard to go up on YouTube and find like Chabot like fail reel, essentially. And it's just all of his defensive miscues.
Yeah.
I really think that this is a team that needs to get away from being the dump and chase team that they have been, for better or worse, under DJ Smith for the past several seasons. They should be looking to control the puck, enter the zone with speed, and do all the things that when you look at who makes the playoffs, it's not very often the teams who get one step across center ice, fire it in, and take their chances that they can retrieve it. It's usually the ones that are coming in and actually generating the offense themselves rather than, boy, I hope this takes the right bounce and we can beat our man there. So it needs to be a full scale shift in philosophy, a shift in development. And a lot of that goes back to the person who's going to be leading a lot of these breakouts from their zone in the Sandersons, in the Shabbats, right? Like,
yeah.
God love them, but Artem Zub shouldn't be doing a whole lot of breakouts there from their own end. It's going to land on those two. So can they take the step forward that's required in front of Linus Ullmark in order for this team to succeed? I would love to see it, because if it doesn't, that's where all of these talks over the years of, oh, do we keep Batherson? Oh, do we keep Shabbat? Oh, well, it's another year of missed playoffs. Do we do right by Giroux and trade him to a contender? Like, that's where, if it's not in the cards for this year, it cannot be another year of development, run it back, development, run it back.
Yeah.
Make some sort of trades here and get these players out of there, because it is not working. This is your last chance, Ottawa Senators, with this currently constructed roster. Otherwise, you got to take a little dynamite to it there, and anyone not named Stützle, Tkachuk, Sanderson, and anyone else is touchable on that roster in my mind.
So it kind of ties perfectly into my podcast sentence for this team is,
you hope it goes sideways from a content standpoint?
Will you, 100%, but will you still be a fan at the end of this season? Which is where I thought you were going when you said this is your last chance.
I won't go that extreme, because I've got to watch something on there. By virtue of me living in Ottawa, I guess we will stay with them for better or worse there. But yeah, no, it's one of those things where, as a fan, I'm tired of seeing the exact same thing and just being told, well, keep buying tickets, next year's different. Is it? Is it really? Like, cool. You've got more themed nights this year, and it's Throwback Thursdays, so it's all 90s music you're playing on those nights. And oh, good, more Star Wars. Like, you can put lipstick on the pig as much as you want, but at the end of the day, it's still a heifer. Like, you've got to absolutely make sure that you are making tangible moves that improve the on-ice product. And we've lost Kyle here.
Oh my God. I never thought that I would hear the word heifer on the show. And here it is.
Your Ottawa Senators, ladies and gentlemen.
There it is. All it took was 38 episodes to get Kyle to utter the words, you can put lipstick on the pig all you want. It's still a heifer. And let's get a golf clap for you for a fantastic use of description to summarize your Ottawa Senators.
Yeah. There we go. My God.
Go Sens, go.
And on that note, I think it's time we throw to our special guest here, because otherwise the podcast is really going.
Yeah, let's get the wheels back on and get over to our guests before we ruin everything.
Yeah, well, from TSN's Calgary Bureau, we've got reporter Salim Valji, who is going to be joining us to talk all things Calgary sports. So we talk Stampeders, we talk no Alberta playoff teams in the CFL in 3/4 of a century here, and obviously the Calgary Flames, who we mentioned and teased a little bit earlier. So stick around for that. Joining us on the podcast today, TSN Calgary Bureau reporter Salim Valji. How are you doing tonight, sir?
Good. Good life right now. Just getting in a workout before the Flames are on the road tomorrow, but I've got to be on CTV tomorrow early morning. So just trying to wiggle all that in. They practiced today. There's Stamps news. So a little bit of a busy day, given it's should be quiet. It's Tuesday, middle of fall, but there's always news, I guess, here. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, we made Big Kyle promise to be on his best behavior, because full disclosure, he is an Edmonton Oilers fan. So
you know what? I grew up an Oilers fan. So
there we go. See,
suffering over there, right? So
you thought you were going to have one over on me, but see, it backfired on you, just like it always does.
shared suffering as kids, I guess. Not really anymore, but yeah.
No, see, we have to go through the lifetime of pain. That's what Kyle's going through
Yeah.
right now as a Senators fan.
Yeah.
He's going through that
exactly.
cycle.
Yeah. They're looking good though. They have a shot at the postseason, so.
Oh man, do we ever look great preseason every year? November rolls around and off come the wheels from the bus there. And say,
yeah.
But speaking of Calgary, obviously we brought you on here to talk all things Calgary sports. And for this year, unfortunately, for the first time in about 75 years, no postseason football in the entire province of Alberta. So figured, lots of Stamps news. And I know Kyle's got one topic he definitely wants to talk about there. But what's just the general consensus in Calgary Stampeders fandom right now? And where did things really kind of go wrong for the club this season?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's one that I've had a lot of conversations with, whether it's season ticket holders or people around town. I think number one, like the organization needs a makeover, sort of off the field more than anything. Like I came here almost like in 2020, and I remember being a kid and watching like our family get-togethers in Edmonton would be like on pause when everybody else in the stands would play, and like my entire family would get into it. And like you see McMahon, 37,000, 36,000 people, Commonwealth the same. And it's just not remotely the same anymore. I think Edmonton's a better sports town, right? So it's got more of an entrenched fan base. But over here, like, the Stamps don't really have a presence with people who are not season ticket holders. And as a result, attendance was really low this season. I think like brand awareness was really low. I think there's fans that are disgruntled with the lack of perks that they get. I know it's wading into the weeds a little bit, but the brand has taken quite a hit. It's probably safe to say they're going to move on from Jake, right? Like they made a really fascinating signing today, PJ Walker, who started NFL games very recently. But even when Jake was brought in to replace Bo, they didn't really put him out in the community. There weren't billboards around, and in Calgary, they're used to stability at the quarterback position, right? So that's probably the biggest question. Is who's going to be the quarterback next season. It certainly doesn't look like it's going to be Jake, especially it sounds like Matt Schultz is going to start for this whatever bowl you want to call it on Saturday between the two non-playoff teams. But I think they've got to figure out player personnel as well, right? Like if you look at it, Reggie Begelton seems like the only guy that night in and night out is producing, and they've got a very, very talented Jalen Philpott who they can't seem to figure out how to use, and is he being like, even with Jake, it was always check down football, right? Like I think he has the lowest average per completion in the league. And there's a lot of challenges, right? Their offensive and defensive lines have struggled. LeBras as their number one pick looks really good, but he's just one guy in the backfield. Trey Roberson's had a disappointing season. There's the locker room fight after the last home game. I could go on, but that's it in a nutshell. So.
Yeah. And, you look at Calgary, especially with the Stampeder brand, as you're speaking about. And Calgary's always been synonymous as being that top level club, which is why we're seeing, this crazy stat of not having a team in Alberta in the playoffs for the first time in, in a century. So, the biggest thing that you can look at, and you already kind of mentioned the two names that I wanted to speak about, is the brand awareness comes with star players. And what's more star player in the CFL than a quarterback? You need to have a brand quarterback. How much does Calgary miss Bo Levi Mitchell in a year like this, especially given the way that they kind of, unceremoniously just moved away, thinking that, he's past his prime, and he's kind of found the fountain of youth in the second year in Hamilton. And now we're looking at the other side of it. We're trying to groom the young quarterback like Jake. Hasn't really worked out all that great. And, from there, the PJ Walker signing is interesting because, like you mentioned, he is a former NFL player. He started games in the NFL, but he's kind of tailor-made for the Canadian game. But does that translate into brand awareness? So, your thoughts on, one, do we miss Bo Levi Mitchell more than maybe we thought we did? And two, does PJ Walker realistically fill that void that they're missing? Or is it going to be, let's start over from scratch next year?
Good questions. I think off the field, like Bo had a presence, right? In the media, he had a presence. He was a Texan that really entrenched himself in the community. Stuff like being on social media and even his wife being on social media. I know those are trivial things, but not only was he a top end quarterback, but he was basically a Calgarian without having been born here, right? And I think that matters. And Jake's a good guy, but I don't think he has the same presence in the locker room, for instance. He doesn't have the same presence publicly. And I think that that matters, right? Ultimately, the Stamps, like everyone, want to make money and want to fill seats and they want people to buy their merchandise. And Bo had the pedigree and Bo had the charisma publicly to help in that regard. And Jake is young and he's growing and maybe doesn't have those things yet. But I think that's a factor. And then you look at it, Bo might win MOP this season. I don't think he's the favorite. I think there'll be Roland Milligan, but Bo might be the MOP. And it makes you wonder, did the Stamps cut ties a little bit early? Was everyone in sync in terms of the offense? Like again, they check it down so much. Like they don't throw the ball deep at all. But like even in Bo's last season, like it seemed like they were reverting back to a conservative style. And I know that Hamilton under Milanovic is a little bit more like that, but you wonder just, was it a couple of years too early? Did they handle the transition well? In terms of PJ Walker, it's really fascinating, right? Like I don't think a guy brings his young daughter and his partner up to Calgary to just be a practice squad guy, right? Like it does look like this is a signing that could last well beyond the few weeks of being on the practice squad. And even Dickinson today said in the media that he didn't rule out PJ Walker playing down the stretch. Like this is their last home game and it looks like Matt Schultz is going to start. I'd be shocked if Jake gets another start. Like why not figure out who that person is? And I think, the Stamps have a lot of really good people working for them, but I don't think they have the resources to, build a campaign around whoever's going to be the next face of the franchise. Who is the face of the franchise, right? Like, so there's a lot of questions on the field and off the field, but I think PJ Walker is a really interesting signing. Like, who are the next great CFL quarterbacks, right? Is it a Taylor Powell? Like, is it Shea Patterson in Saskatchewan? I would imagine they take a run at Davis Alexander in Montreal, given it's Cody's team and him and Jason Moss are pretty tied at the hip. But Davis Alexander, PJ Walker, they're going to have a new signal caller likely, and they need it, right? And they need to make that person be in the community publicly and really use that person because season tickets are down, attendance is down at some point. I know on the post-game call-in shows, people are upset, and I imagine, I don't have any inside info on this, but I imagine the Stamps spend among the fewest dollars on their roster, less dollars than most CFL teams, and that's a factor too, right? Like you've got no bid for Fuller and Ormelade, Jameer Thurman, Winton McManus, Sean Bain Jr. Like there's a pretty long list of guys that have left here for more money, and that's another question, right? So there's talent evaluation. It's do they have the resources, and do they have an ability to define their standing, their place in the Calgary community? Because I think that's taken a pretty big hit too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we've rattled off, a couple dozen kind of touch points here that they need to improve, right? And I think as you look at this, given the fact that they've especially got an extended offseason coming up here, and we'll have a little bit more time than some of the teams that are going on deep playoff runs, like if you had to boil it down to just based on what would make the most impact with those who are ultimately going to spend their hard-earned dollars to go and see Stampeders games, like what are maybe the top 3 priorities that this team really needs to put in place to have a tangible impact if they want to avoid finishing in the cellar of the West Division next season?
I think it's a couple of things, and I'm not a marketing guy by any stretch, but I think when you have and again, they're great human beings that are a lot smarter than me that work for the Stampeders. I think the Legacy Night 2 seasons ago and the Wally Buono night this season, they were great, but there's a sense that that's only for season ticket holders. That if you're a fan that doesn't go to games or goes to 1 or 2 games a year, then you're not really invited to those events. And I get it. Season ticket holders pay a ton of money. You want them to feel included, but like the Stamps have been like the premier organization in the league for a long time. Not just with their record, but with like the quarterback factory and stability and just expectations of excellence season after season. And it's taken a hit the past couple of seasons, but to me, you can use those legacy nights and bring back Wally, who's a central figure in all of those, a lot of those championships, and even Huff, who's still here. You can use them to attract new fans. You can say, you know what, like we're kind of like the New England Patriots of the CFL in a way, right? Like we've had this standard for a long time where, and you can use that to attract new fans. And I think sometimes they're a little bit too closed door with those meetings and with those interactions. And I mean, even something as simple, and again, there are great people working there that I love and respect, but I think even something like the Legacy Night 2 seasons ago, and why not have Jeff Garcia address the crowd? He's out on the field. He's a CFL legend. He's a guy that had a really, really good career, like Pro Bowl career in the NFL. Why not have him like say hi to the fans, use the mic at McMahon, like rile them up? I know it was really bad weather, but why not do things like that? And that attracts fans. That attracts the new generation of season ticket holders. Upgrading McMahon is another thing that I could rant for many, many minutes about, but that's a factor too, right? Like I have buddies who have kids and they're just like if my 4-year-old has to go pee, I can't go to a stadium that can't accommodate for that. So there are lots of great people there, but they need to like maybe go to Canmore or the Rockies and, shut the phones off and just get the creative juices flowing, because I think the franchise is at a little bit of a crossroads right now, to be honest, with the attendance falling, with the huge question at quarterback. Like there's a lot going on. I mean, Dickinson, if he's going to retain the 3 jobs and a central figure of the organization, and his role, what it will look like heading forward, like there's a lot going on here. So it's a good thing, we live in the mountain, close to the mountains, and just get away the brain trust, maybe go for a hike. And that's maybe sometimes where the best ideas come, right? When you're away from all this. So
yeah, well,
divvying everything up, it's worked out pretty well for the Edmonton franchise since they made that move. So maybe it's something Calgary has to look into for sure. But yeah, anyways, I digress.
yeah,
we could go on about this, right? But I mean, they're at an interesting point, and I hope that they kind of turn the corner, because the CFL is a great sport. I think it's a lot more of a community vibe than the NHL, like the tailgating, everything like that. Like I think even like people that are new to Canada, they probably can't afford to go to an NHL game, but a lot of the time, CFL tickets are pretty accessible, right? So there's a lot of potential there, and I'm sure they'll figure it out. But they are, I think, at a little bit of a pivotal point in their recent franchise memory. And I think Jay McNeil, our president's got some interesting calls to make for sure.
Yeah. Well, speaking of franchises that are kind of at a crossroads there, if we shift over to the NHL, I mean, there's kind of 2 trains of thought here, right? There's obviously what the sports books are expecting the Calgary Flames to go out there and do this year. And then there's what the Calgary Flames players and coaching staff and all of that are obviously putting out into the media, the classic, no one believes in us, and, we've got everything we need in this locker room.
Yeah.
Like, how much of that do you think is just coach speak versus what is it like a realistic expectation for this Calgary roster based on how they're currently constructed heading into the season?
I don't think they'll be bottom 3. I'd be stunned if they were in the playoffs. But I mean, Dustin Wolf had a really good training camp. I think the mindset of the club is in a healthy spot, where even Nazem Kadri kind of reaffirmed his commitment to stay today, saying like, "Yeah, I don't have to answer questions from you guys about trade deadline stuff," right? So, I think having a guy like that, like Coleman, Mackenzie Weegar, Backlund, I think they're all saying the right things, and they're all setting a good tone for how this season is, right? And there's going to be growing pains, right? Like Martin Pospisil is playing with Huberdeau, who's the highest paid player in franchise history, and Anthony Mantha, who's probably going to wind up on TSN's trade date list at some point, right? Like that's expected to be a scoring line, and Pospisil had a pretty good rookie season. Like he's going to have growing pains. His teams have figured out how to defend him. They know that he's a pest that doesn't fight, and like that's a factor he'll have to navigate. So there's things like that which I think will be challenging. Like Connor Zary is going to be playing with Michael Backlund and Blake Coleman to start, and Backlund and Coleman get an awful lot of starts in their own end because they're so good defensively. They get matched up against the best players in the league, and I think Connor will benefit from that. But will his offense still continue at the pace it was last season? There are some unknowns in the back end, right? Like Kevin Ball's early in his career, he looked really good in the preseason. Miramanov, I was expecting a little more from in the preseason, but he's got potential to be like a pretty good offensive defenseman. So there are lots of question marks. I think that they'll wind up finishing 9th or 10th. I don't think this is a lottery team bad. And they'll have growing pains along the way, but it'll be a fun, interesting brand of hockey. And I mean, they're not lying to their fans anymore, really, about what they're doing. Not that they were really before, but everyone knows what this is, and they're leaning into it. So I think that's a good thing. You were talking about the Stamps brand. Well, I think the Flames brand is in a better spot, and they're communicating with their fans, and I think that's a big thing. And you've got an extroverted GM and Craig Conroy as well, who makes himself available, who I think has done a pretty good job early on transaction wise, and I think fans really gravitate to him. So they're doing a good job on that front. It's probably going to be growing pains because of so many unknowns on the roster, but they're setting the right tone, and I think that's important when fans really have been clamoring for this for an awful long time over here, right? And now they're getting their wish. So
yeah. Well, you mentioned the back end there as well, too. And obviously someone who could have helped out in that regard there that just got sent back down to the minors is Zane Parik. So were you a little bit surprised that he didn't get kind of that 9-game look, or is he still too raw at this stage of his career that it was inevitable that he wasn't going to be breaking camp with the big league club here?
I think, Kyle, it was pretty inevitable. He wasn't going to break camp. Like, even in practice, and I think Zane's going to be a heck of a player. Like, there's no denying that skill set. He might be like one of the only franchise defensemen in Calgary who's like 65, 75 points. Like, he's got that ceiling, I think. But in drills, he just looked a step slower. He wasn't exactly going up against like Kadri and Backlund every shift in scrimmages and whatnot, but he did look slower with his gaps and things like that. You could read his body language pretty clearly in his media scrum when he was sent back, and you could tell he was pretty choked. But he's got such a bright future ahead of him. I was a little surprised that they didn't give him a little bit of an audition, but when you look at what he did during preseason and scrimmages, you could kind of tell they were doing it for his own good. And I think they're very conscious. Even I don't think he played at preseason at home either. Like, I think they're pretty conscious of letting these kids develop at their own pace. Like, they don't want them being rushed into the exposure that quickly either. And I think that's a factor. So, I mean, the kid's 18 years old. Samuel Honzek had a pretty disappointing 18-year-old rookie camp, training camp after he was drafted, and he's on Nazem Kadri's line right now, right? So you can point to that and say, hey, maybe Zane's gonna push for a spot next season. But I mean, it's I think for his best interest. And look at what he's gonna do now in Saginaw, right? He'll probably play 35 minutes. He'll be the man there, one of the stars on a team that might win the Memorial Cup again. Like, how's that instead of being a sixth defenseman on a club that isn't necessarily going to be in the playoff conversation come February, March, most likely? So.
Yeah.
Well, and it's to say it's worked out pretty well for Evan Bouchard up north as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I kind of see the same progression there. Kyle, before you get into your point, I just want to say, like, from a goaltending perspective, you kind of see where they're looking at going. Obviously, you just got rid of Markstrom. Now you're going to have, the goalie by committee approach coming into this season. Do you see one of these guys kind of taking that job and running with it? Or do you honestly have it be like Conroy's going to let, these guys kind of win their job and then look to solidify that in the future at the trade deadline?
Well, Vladar's a pending free agent, right? Like, that's a factor in this too. So, I mean, I think they'll wind up doing 60-40 split with Vladar and Wolf. Like again, I don't think they're going to throw Wolf, pardon the horrible pun, to the Wolves. They've been pretty sort of intentional with their development of these players, and I think that'll continue with Wolf and not. I think Vladar's going to start tomorrow, and he might even start the home opener, but it'll be a competition. And then honestly, there's a situation out there where like they're both back next season, right? Where like maybe like in looking around the league, like tandems seem to be the rage a lot more than having one guy taking 60 starts, right? Like, I could see that as a possibility, them battling it out. They don't necessarily, I think they're really high on Devin Cooley, and I imagine Cooley will get a look at some point, like 6 NHL games, like he was on a pretty bad Sharks team last season. I know that they want to really work with him and his fundamentals and movement and calming him down in the crease. So that's like a name we'll probably see at some point, but I mean, there's a situation where all three of these guys are back next season when they hope to take a step and be a little more in the playoff conversation. But I mean, it's an open competition, right? Like, there's a reason Jacob Pelletier got put on waivers, and not a ton of quote unquote rebuilding teams would do that with a guy that's 23 and still, kind of maybe not top prospect anymore, but a season ago he was, right? So, it goes to show they are putting their money where their mouth is in terms of, hey, this is an open competition. And even having Matt Coronado as the extra forward, like Samuel Honzek earned that spot. And as a result, an older prospect sits. So I like what they're doing. And in terms of the goalie battle, like it is going to be an open competition. And I think we'll see guys that the guy that has the high hand will be the one that starts.
Yeah. Well, before we let you go here, I would be remiss as an Ottawa Senators fan if I didn't at least get someone who has kind of boots on the ground in Calgary. Give us a little snapshot into Carter Yakimchuk's skill set and what he kind of brings to the table. Obviously, he got just released by the Sens back to the Calgary Hitmen there. What should Sens fans be excited about in terms of him as a prospect moving forward?
I mean, his progression is fascinating. Hey, I thought I remember he was like going down a little bit on draft boards. And in fact, like you would know more, but like the Sens taking him where they took him, I think that was a couple of spots higher than than he was projected to go. Puck moving defenseman, I'm shocked as how great a preseason he had, ability to control the game. Even defensively, he looked really good in his gaps and things like that. He'll come back to Calgary. I think they're going to be a really good squad this season. Medicine Hats, like, I'd be shocked if they didn't win the title, but Calgary's going to have a decent team. But yeah, it's like what's not to be excited about, right? Like he's not only got the offensive skill set, but he's clearly, he's physically matured. He's got a good stick. Like I think he's surprised even probably Steve Scales with how long he's stuck around, especially for a defenseman. And it sounds like he's got another good blue liner back there for a long time, right? So there's a lot to be happy about. So,
well, music to my ears there. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. As
soft spoken, he'll learn how to be in front of the cameras a little more. We'll teach him over here in Calgary, so he'll be a quote machine by the time he gets to Ottawa full time. So
there you go.
We'll have him up there for some media training there while he's in town.
Give him the TSN treatment, So.
Yeah. Well, Salim, we appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us tonight there. For those that are listening, where can they connect with you on social media or anything else you've got going on that you want to plug?
Sure. I mean, sadly, I got a TikTok account now, so I think that I have to do a video for that tomorrow. So that's just at Salim Valji. Salim Valji TSN for Instagram, just Salim Valji for X. I don't know, LinkedIn. Looking to, I don't know, who knows, right? But pretty easy to find. Just Google and try and ignore all the Reddit threads from angry Flames fans. But there's some good stuff in there. There's some good stuff in page 5. I think that's when the good Google stuff about me gets going. So just didn't hear till then. So.